right, so this is a big test. We're going to see how this goes. So you can see I'm in my classroom, which I share with a couple of other faculty. I'm going to turn on a light here. Don't know if that will help or not. Marginally, all right. So, so about this time last week, I read through the first chapter of Norms and Nobility, and my plan was to kind of start a video blog where I'm constantly reading it and kind of giving my thoughts extemporaneously as I'm going through it. And today I had a little bit of time. I thought I would move on to the next section. So this is Norms and Nobility by David V Hicks. And we're going to start with the prologue today. It starts off with a quote. "I know that we live in an age where the homely or psychological detail is considered all important. We like heroes in shirt sleeves, or in other words, we don't like heroes. But things were not always that way, and today is not forever." And this is from Louis Auchincloss, Auchincloss. Section 1. A college student I know keeps 3 books on his night table: the Bible, the Iliad, and Louis Auchincloss's 1964 novel, The Rector of Justin. When I once asked him why that novel, he responded, "Because it raises questions I cannot answer or ignore, the sort of questions that possess a wisdom apart from answers." Wow, what a great response. Man, I wish that I could have generated a response like that in college. In the novel, Dr. Frank Prescott, the eventual founder and rector of Justin Martyr, sets out to build a school that not only trains young men to compete in a ruthless world, but compels them to look beyond the present and palpable when charting their ambitions, and challenges them to lay down their lives in the service of a self-transcending ideal. Prescott's dream, no mere 19th century show of rugged individualism or muscular Christianity, embodies the teacher's ancient and perennial desire to connect the wisdom of the past with man's present and future actions, to educate the young to know what is good, to serve it above self, to reproduce it, and to recognize that in knowledge lies this responsibility. But Prescott fails. Justin Martyr refuses to produce uniform paragons of manly virtue, and Auchincloss leaves his readers to ponder some disturbing questions. Is Prescott's failure inevitable? A flaw of conception, personality, or circumstance? What does his failure teach about the devastating influence of a materialistic and democratic society on education? That's a good question. What is the solution to the paradox between educating for the world's fight and for the soul's salvation? From a modern reader's point of view, there is something curiously quaint about Headmaster Prescott's concerns. To be sure, the world's fight and the soul's salvation are supposed to be timeless themes, but within the context of contemporary literature on education, they sound like the wailing of a flute in Phrygian mode, antiquated and foreign. The new literature plays a very different tune. It reports the influences of applied social research, costing billions of dollars, on educational policy, and debates the pros and cons of citizen participation in educational policymaking. Since 1969, the federal government has spent roughly $70 million a year on national social policy experimentation relating to education alone, according to Cohen and Garrett, 1975, of Harvard. Okay, so that means that between 1969 and 1975, they were spending $70 million a year. I wonder how much they're spending now. Jamie, pull up how much they're spending now. Each year, federal agencies receive funding from Congress. In fiscal year 2023, the Department of Education had $94.06 billion distributed among its 10 subcomponents. Wow, that's quite a lot. Yeah, that's a lot. All right. One is not surprised to find, therefore, that such lucrative stakes, if they only knew, $94 billion, that such lucrative stakes invite a preoccupation with these topics while spawning an army of writers who are more apt to regard themselves as researchers and scientists than essayists or philosophers or veteran teachers. There is no room in the elaborate federal grant scheme for a Montague, a Comte, a Van Doren. This research into timely issues affecting our schools and children has supplanted the timeless concerns of the older writers, and in the process, much of the debate over educational policy has centered around how our policy is formulated rather than around what it is or should be. I think that's a really key concern, and I think that's something that we end up doing really well, at least at my school, is we try not to add in policy where culture would do. Of course, we have policies, right? But that's more of a matter of rules than it is a matter of ensuring some sort of like compliance to an undisclosed higher order virtue. My sense here is that for the most part, what we're looking at is, just taking the title, right? Norms and Nobility. I'm assuming that what we're going to end up looking at is a group of people, or at least the author wants to develop a group of people that are looking to develop norms and looking to develop a sort of nobility, almost like a noblesse oblige for those who are educated. Ideally, we would all experience some sort of nobility such that we have our own responsibilities for the generation and building up of culture in positive and good ways, I think. And so, and if we attempt to build a policy to generate that, I think we'll fail, because no one can really follow into the letter of the law unless they're also in the spirit of the law. And so I think that what we'll see is that we'll achieve better behavior, not through policymaking, but rather through not just better behavior. I think we'll achieve a better educated student class by attempting to, I'm thinking these things out. I think we'll find that we build men and women with chests, not as the result of policy, but as the result of building heroes. Yeah, I'm going to go with that. A new language, turgid and unreadable, hides under the mantle of experimentation and research the volumes of common sense cloaked in gibberish, now being written by many educational experts. Not only does their language make abominable prose, it helps to suppress many of the really interesting questions involving value judgments, cultural norms, and religious truths, as well as questions touching on the first and final causes. Sorry, let me try that again. Not only does their language make abominable prose, but it helps suppress many of the really interesting questions involving value judgments, cultural norms, and religious truths, as well as questions touching on first and final causes, and those arising from the marvelous, the transcendent, or the simple craving for justice and goodness. These questions, to borrow a phrase, cannot be put into the language of a computer. When the language of the computer is all one, I don't know what he's trying to say here. When the language of the computer is all one speaks. Oh, okay. When the language of the computer is all one speaks, however, they magically and conveniently disappear. So if we generate a society in which people can no longer think in anything other than like the ones and zeros of a binary computer language, then a lot of these questions are disappearing. So, okay, I'm tracking with what's happening now. Unfortunately, this new language seems to inspire reverence and awe in the average citizen, while it permits the expert to stray without public censure from the well-beaten path of his forebears. Even when a confused citizen wonders aloud whether the expert is truly clothed, it hardly matters. The expert's total reliance upon the methods of science renders him incapable of learning from his forebears anyway, for they cannot provide him with the hard statistical and clinical data alone with which he can work. He is like the raw ensign. Learning a new word today. Ensign. A flag or standard, especially a military or naval one, indicating nationality, or a commissioned officer of the lowest rank. Okay, let's see. Ensign is like private in Navy and Coast Guard, I think. Okay, so let's take another look at this. The expert's total reliance upon the methods of science renders him incapable of learning from his forebears anyway, for they cannot provide him with the hard statistical and clinical data alone with which he can work. He is like the raw ensign on the bridge of a ship who, mesmerized by the radar scope, refuses to consult an experienced navigator in the fog. His reversion of language and his ignorance of history afford him the comfortable delusion of not having to look back to get his bearings. Ooh, that's good. Sure of the all-sufficiency of his methods and blind to many of his own primary assumptions, he rejects charts that were made. He is convinced by worse navigators than himself. Wow, that's a really complicated sentence. Okay, let's try that again. Sure of the all-sufficiency of his methods and blind to many of his own primary assumptions. He rejects charts that were made. He's convinced by worse navigators than himself, by which he means by navigators whose methods are antidote to his own. Wow. I can surmise what antidote means, but I'm two words in the same page. Does it say antecedent and I just can't read? No, it's antedate. So like before his time is what I'm assuming this means. Proceed in time to come before something in date. Yeah. Interesting. All right. So let's see in our modern times is, I think, an exact example of this. And it's a mixture of people who don't look at what has come before or think critically about it and analyze it to do anything other than throw it away, right? They don't employ Chesterton's fence. They don't say, I came across this fence and I didn't ask why it was here. I just said, oh, I don't know why it's here. I'm going to tear it down, right? Chesterton's fence says, if you come across this fence, you should be asking why it's here, who put it here, for what reason, is it still fulfilling that purpose? Is there a better way before you tear it down? And I think also a question that should be asked is, why this as opposed to something else? So especially when it comes to things like a consideration of what is most efficient is not always what is best. And so if there is a more efficient option, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the better one. And I think that I see this in my chemistry students a lot, right? We could be very efficient in our understanding of and our ability to do chemistry, which is like the mathematics, the ball and stick models, the forming of compounds, and the breaking apart of compounds. We could spend a lot of time on the doing of the chemistry, but without a lot of background knowledge, it's a little bit meaningless. It doesn't really sit well in any other field. And so without that additional support, we're in a position where they're being trained to do what they're told The students are trained to do what they're told, not trained to think about what's actually occurring and what nature really looks like. And I reject that wholeheartedly. I think that the best part of chemistry is the understanding that we can track and apprehend in the mind's eye what the mathematics can tell us. And I think that that's really important because it helps our brains to expand and move and think outside of ourselves and in new and interesting ways where, for the first time, besides maybe if they discuss like P and Q values in biology, it's going to be their first time where they really see how science has a major bearing on the way that we understand the world, because you can't really understand chemistry outside of our numerical observations, except when you think about the conceptual things, right? So you have one or the other. You can't have, well, you need one and the other. You need both. You can't have just one. If I gave you the concepts behind chemistry and what's happening, you might have a vague notion of what's going on, but until you actually take the measurements yourself and actually employ those methods, you are still going to be lacking in some sort of understanding, right? It's going to be much more beneficial to be in a place where not only do you understand the concept, you also understand the mathematics. Yeah, I think I like that better than what I said initially. And what we're seeing in education is a bunch of people who don't know the damage that they could cause by ignoring the unscientific questions, right? We can consider like Popper or Kuhn's in this as well, like the philosophers of science, especially Popper, who's all about like, you must be this falsifiable to ride the science ride. And if you're not that falsifiable, you can't play. Sorry. There are other tools that we have besides science to understand whether or not something is true or good or worthwhile. And we ignore those to our own detriment. And I think that our modern age desires to ignore them because they're absolutely terrified about what it would mean to have to seriously consider philosophically what's going on. And I think that maybe that was true for the 20 teens, but now that we've reached a point where the science is telling us things that scientific data is telling us things that we don't want to hear, we don't want to consider as a culture, we're actually throwing it away in favor of a new natural philosophy, which makes no sense and is grounded in no reality. It's grounded actually in unreality, right? The idea that we can make up whatever we want and bring it into being. You will be like God, knowing both good and evil. Yeah. And then you've got, what Voldemort said in the first Harry Potter book, in the Chamber of the Mirror of Erised. He said, "There is no such thing as good and evil. There is only power, and those too weak to seek it." Yeah, I think we need educators that believe in the difference between good and evil, and educators that believe that while the scientific metrics are very useful, they ought not to be primary. It's also ludicrous to assume, I think, that those who have had such success in history educating young people ought not to be paid attention to, or even that they're not worth paying attention to, right? That, yeah, sure, you can read them or whatever, but what we really care about is, what is the data telling us? We don't care what the philosophy says. We don't care what other people are saying. We don't really care about what people have done in the past. We are beyond that, right? It's the year 2023. We can do whatever we want, however we want, as long as it fits the data. I don't know. It seems totally obscured because they don't really care about the data either, unless it's demonstrating their point. And usually the points come to the detriment of the students. So I don't really know what to think. There's a lot going on here. I think what we can say with certainty, what I can say with certainty at this point, is that it's a couple of things. The world is not, even though we live in a quantum experience, which is to say a discrete experience, to undergo such a resolution is unhelpful. We can look too closely at something. Miss the forest for the trees sort of thing. I think I can say that a lot of the educational bodies that control what it is that students are learning and what teachers are teaching are full of supposed scientists, social scientists that don't really understand education. Enamored with their new way of doing things, they forget to look and see how people have done things before and to glean what is good and throw away what is not good. We can verify those thoughts by scientific means, but we cannot generate new ideas by scientific means. New ideas about good ways to educate, which puts us in a position where many of the policies that are being employed end up not helping students but harming them, and also fitting them into the idea that the world ought to be discrete, that you must have cause and effect, question and answer in things that must always be definable. And it ruins the idea, like as in brings to ruin any conception of the idea that there are questions out there that are unanswerable that are worth asking anyway, because there's a wisdom there to them. All right. Let's see. This is going to be long. I hope this video isn't longer than the last one. All right. We've gone through 2 pages. We've got 12 left. I'm going to hurry up a little bit. Meanwhile, in a language all too comprehensible, the journalist decides the nation's plummeting academic standards, Johnny's inability to read and write, the weakness of our science and mathematics programs in comparison with other modern states, the gradual extinction of foreign languages and fine arts from the average high school curriculum, and the scandal of our declining national test scores. As if this were not enough, the journalist goes on to describe the modern American schoolhouse, a breeding ground for various forms of addiction, intimidation, and malaise. I mean, it's not totally wrong, but then the question is, are any scientists or even social scientists in a position where they can actually identify the causes here? Or is rather the idea that we ought to be focusing on some of these test scores leading to some of these outcomes? All right. But here he leaves off, and the question of what our schools are actually teaching goes back to the expert, the social scientist whose expensive research has done apparently little to improve the situation. Yeah, exactly. When stirred to respond to these charges, the expert may suggest an administrative reorganization or a revised, by which he means simply more, professional training for teachers. That's absolutely right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the question then becomes, is the training actually doing anything positive for the students? Because usually it's not doing something positive for the teachers. I mean, teachers have a hard job, and usually it takes a lot of time to accomplish it well. Well, maybe I'll rephrase that. I don't view my job as hard, right? Like I'm not a particle physicist that's constantly banging my head against the wall of scientific discovery, trying to knock it over and discover something new. I mean, that is hard, grueling work. But some people find a real joy in it in a way that they don't find it to be hard and grueling. And I think in the same way, a good educator, while it is, I guess it is to some hard and grueling work, the good educator, or the one who's predisposed to be a good educator, would be in a position where it's quite a joy and a relief to be able to pass on culture and in the form of some sort of education, or pass on culture, I suppose, and knowledge into the next generation. Okay, what does that mean? Why am I going that way? Because I'm talking to myself, that's why. Yeah, I find that in many cases, the solutions that are promoted by homes, so by parents and by administrations, are usually We know that this isn't working. We don't know why it's not working. We're going to try a couple of things and see if something shakes out. And I don't always agree with that. I don't disagree, but I'm not convinced that there shouldn't. English is hard. My thought is that it would be much better to say, how was this done in the past? What are the things that we can remove in order to look more like the past for our students to be more successful? I think that's a better mode. And then once things are removed, we can ask, what are the most important things, and add some more of those. I think. Well, we'll see. We'll see. When stirred to respond to these charges, the expert may suggest an administrative reorganization or a revised, by which he simply means more, professional training for teachers. He may champion some newfangled psychological or technological trend or innovation. It's very common. When I was growing up, the Philadelphia school system invested like $1 billion to have every student get a computer. But I'm not convinced that was the right move. I think it would be better if we invested $1 billion and bought them all, like Harvard's like Western classics, in what is it, like 54 volumes or something like that. That would have been a much better educational expense and much cheaper than buying everyone a computer for, like, to what end? I mean, can they write well? What is the difference between writing by hand and writing by computer? There's some sort of efficiency going on there, yeah, but the attention to detail that is required. Again, efficiency is not the best metric for education, right? There's a quality, a je ne sais quoi quality that we're looking for. It's not conscientiousness. It's not openness. It's not, I think it's maybe it's wonder. And I think that writing by hand predisposes us to wonder much more than writing by computer. All right. Going back to this, because we're short on time. He may champion some newfangled psychological or technological trend or innovation. He may bow to the public's mounting paranoia by demanding a return to the basics which when examined turns out to be nothing but a utilitarian learning, what kids need to know to get jobs, the 3 R's, plain and simple. Auchincloss's questions go unanswered, as if they had never been asked or have suddenly lost all meaning. Materialism and democracy no longer appear to threaten education, nor is the soul's salvation a legitimate concern of the modern school teacher. But things were not always this way. The questions and concerns of the older writers were once the focus of education, an education we might rather loosely refer to as classical. My purpose in writing this book is to offer a personal interpretation of classical education, its ends as well as some of its means, and to respond to the objections of those who might approve of the goals of such an education, but who believe that it cannot meet the needs of an industrial democracy, or that it is not feasible as a model for mass education. I have some hard words for those social scientists whose analytical methods and unexamined assumptions have worked a profound mischief in our schools. My wish is not, however, to banish science from the modern curriculum, but to save it. Yes, and I think to put it in its proper place, right, as a means of logic, a means of understanding, but not the means of understanding. We can use it to inform our philosophy, but if we put the scientific cart before the philosophical horse, then it ends up being the blind leading the blind, and both fall into a ditch and die. Science without a philosophical direction or understanding is worthless. Well, in the long term. Right, but to save it. My wish is not, however, to banish science from the modern curriculum, but to save it. For I fear that in the modern educators' incoherent understanding of science, I assume that means incoherent understanding of science, his naive belief in its all-sufficiency and his unwillingness to acknowledge its methodological limitations are leading to a reaction and revulsion against it. If descriptive science is to aid our schools and flourish in them, it must remain in the service of the prescriptive ideal. Exactly. I totally agree with that. All right. That's section 1 of the prologue. I think I'm going to end it there. And I think I might just give a few closing remarks as this is turning into something other than what I initially imagined it, which is kind of a mix between an audiobook and my own thoughts. I'm not sure that qualifies under fair use or not. And so I might need to, instead of be reading aloud as I go through this, I might instead need to read it on my own, pull out certain things that I want to share, and talk about them. And I think that will also help keep the time down a little bit. And I think that'll be more useful for me in the future. I'm not sure that many people will see this, but I don't want to be unfair to Hicks or the University Press of America, because this is technically their intellectual property. And me reading it aloud when the book is worth, or at least it's selling for what, $47 or so, I think is unfair. But to that end, if you're interested in engaging more in this conversation, you should absolutely pick up a copy of this book. I mean, I think that it really is worth the money. It's really expensive, but maybe your school can get it for you, or maybe you have a really wealthy relative. I know that I'm in my late 20s, and $50 for a book is a lot, but could be worth it. Could be worth it. Also, as I'm continuing to go through some books that have been recommended to me, I think doing this more frequently is going to be a really great way to get me to read more. And so I might also be beginning to do this for a couple of other works as well. I think that'd be good. All right, well, I'm going to leave it there. Got some time tomorrow, probably go through section 2, and then I believe there's also a section 3. Yeah. That's it. See you next time.